Can we just talk?
You've tuned into Candid Conversation with John Davis Perry II.
Greetings. I want to welcome you to another broadcast of Candid Conversation with yours truly, John Davis Perry II. I pray that your day has been going extremely well on today. Each day that God gives us is literally a gift, and it's our responsibility to use that gift and manage it with the best of our abilities. And so I pray that you're managing your day and that you're having a tremendously great day on today. Of course, every week I come with the guests during our time of discussion, and we're gonna get to our guests very soon. But I want to remind you that we are in a global crisis in terms of the coronavirus. And so it's so important that you do your part to make sure that as a community, we're able to stay healthy and that we're able to stay safe. And so we want to encourage you to please mask up. Of course, we live in a country that gives us certain freedoms. But this is a time that we all need to come into agreement to do the best that we can to make sure that we keep our families safe, our community safe, so that we can all get through this in the best way possible. And so please mask up. Now, without any further ado, I've been announcing that today's guest will be none other than Chief Powell, John Powell. And I've been getting a lot of mixed reviews about today's guest. Some people excited about me sharing with Chief John Powell. Some other people not so excited, raising questions about the relevance of it. And I want to state from the offset of this broadcast that in order for any community to be healthy, we have to be open to communication and have to be open to dialogue. Doesn't mean that we'll always agree, but it does mean that we're intelligent enough, controlled enough to have civil discussion that hopefully leads to productivity and advancement. And so the purpose for our discussion on today is birthed out of that, understanding that communication is a necessity of healthy community. And so without any further ado, I want to introduce to our audience on today none other than Chief John Powell. Thank you so much for being a part of Candid Conversation with me on today, Mr. Powell. Will you say hello to our guest?
Yeah, good afternoon. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to come out. Also, thank you for your comments as far as the coronavirus.
Right.
It's extremely important that everybody stays healthy and take care of each other and their families.
Absolutely. Our first responders
Absolutely.
Are greatly being affected by this thing. And it's something that none of us was expecting and really none of us was prepared for.
That's correct. And they do put themselves in a dangerous situation. And it's not just first responders, but also people who offer services to the public that are needed.
Right.
Gas station attendants.
Yeah.
People working at the grocery stores, people working at convenience stores, people who may ensure that we have the items that we need in order to be comfortable.
Yeah, that's so true. Let's start today. Of course, we want to talk about a variety of things. Of course, there's some tough things that we want to talk about. There have been questions that the community are concerned about, and we'll get to all of that. But I want to start out just getting a feel of who you are.
Okay.
We know you by title and by job description, but in terms of knowing the man, most of us have not had the privilege of sitting down with you and just knowing you. And so tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you raised?
I was born and raised in Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
I was the son of a law enforcement officer, and I have spent since 1983 being involved in law enforcement, either at the local level, the state level, or the federal level.
Wow.
And I have also served overseas working with the Department of Defense. In the Department of State, I served a period of time in Afghanistan and a period of time in Haiti, providing services to that community. I'm a Christian, first and foremost. Married, my wife and I, Beth, been married for 25 years. We have 3 children and 2 grandchildren.
All right. Okay. Now, what encouraged you to enter into law enforcement? Of course, you stated that your father was in law enforcement himself, and so I'm sure that had great influence. But aside from just the influence of seeing a father who was committed to being a minister of justice, what were the things, the underlining internal things that caused you to want to be a part of law enforcement?
Well, I think first and foremost, to give back to the community.
Okay.
I've been blessed. Like I said, I was raised with a good family, was brought up in a great home.
Right.
Christian environment, and I wanted to give back to the community. I felt like service is first.
Right.
And I chose to go into law enforcement, and I started my career at a sheriff's office locally. From there, I moved on to federal agency, and then got into the administrative part of law enforcement, which police chief or director of law enforcement service.
Right. Well, I asked that question because, a person's history tells a lot about the decisions that they make in terms of their career path, especially when it comes to being servants of the community.
Yes, sir.
I shared before, my mom and dad both come from religious families, and so I was always in church. And it was prophesied when I was a baby that I would pastor. I knew nothing about the prophecy because I, of course, was a baby at the time. And my father, during a very, very impressional season, used to always watch boxing. I would always, Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, and all of those guys. He would be just in front of the television. And so I would come home from church every Sunday, and he would be sitting there watching boxing. And I can remember young, someone asked me, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "I want to be a boxer and a preacher."
There you go.
And so, I guess fighting in the spirit, it has been what I've done with my life at some levels. And so it's very interesting to hear those things that have influenced you to go into the career path. And it's clear that you have a lot of experience.
Well, like I said earlier, I've been blessed. I had exposure to a lot of good people. I think that you're always learning.
Right.
You never stop learning till the day that you leave the good earth.
Right.
And, the experiences that I have gained, has been, based on real life experiences.
Yeah.
And like I say, from some excellent people, not just here, in the United States, but also overseas. I learned a lot when I was serving in Afghanistan and Haiti.
Right.
As far as how blessed we really are in the United States. When you go over to that type of environment and you see what other folks are actually exposed to. Right. It gives you a more of a sense of appreciation for what we have here in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think your experience will weigh in extremely heavy. We know that currently in our national media, there's a lot of focus on law enforcement in terms of misconduct of law enforcement or the overuse of force with law enforcement, and that has been a subject that has been ongoing. Protesters and different social organizations are very intentional about keeping that in the media right now. In terms of a need to focus on national overuse of force and misconduct in law enforcement, do you see that as a legitimate effort, or do you think it's something that people are just trying to hype up and there's not very much need for attention in that area?
No, sir. I think there's attention needed in that area. I think that it's obvious by the trending across the country, right, that there is definitely some changes that have to be done. Right. And let me say this. I have never been a proponent of civilian law enforcement looking like the military. In our country, and the reason I'm getting off into that, because you'll see where I'm going in just a minute. I don't think that civilian law enforcement should dress like a soldier. Right. I don't think that the weapons that they carry to the public ought to be that of the military. Right. There's a clear separation of the U.S. military and civilian law enforcement. I've caught a lot of heat rounds. We were talking about that before we come on the radio about heat rounds from, members of the police department, because some of the clothing or some of the items that they wanted to wear, I wouldn't let them do it.
Okay.
And there's reasons for that, because we work for the public.
Right.
And the public expects professional civilian law enforcement. And, I think all law enforcement should look professional. They should act professional, because when you look and when you look and give that appearance, and also you address people with respect, you're going to get respect back.
Absolutely.
And that's, to me, that's the foundation where we need to go. Also, I'd like to bring up the fact that, this issue's been going on for a while. I'm talking about distrust in law enforcement.
Right.
President Obama did a study, 21st law enforcement, and there's a foundation that's laid for certain platforms that need to be established. And to go over these platforms, there's several of them, and the reason I've got them printed down so I don't miss any of them.
Okay.
One of them is building trust and being legitimate. You got to have trust with the community that you serve, but you also have to show that you're legitimate in your actions. Right. That you're going to do what you say you're going to do. Right. That you're just not, patronizing somebody. Right. Additionally, you got to have policy and oversight. Your policies, a policy is not something that is drafted and that is, it stays current forever. It's something that has to be reviewed, has to be updated based on trending, based on the growth of your community, based on what's taking place in your community. And the oversight. You should welcome oversight either from a civilian panel or from a blend of a law enforcement and civilian panel to make sure that you're doing what you say you're going to do. Right. And help you with your policies. Additionally, technology and social media. I think when I first started back in the 80s, we didn't have the ability to reach out to the community as frequently as we can now. Right. You can pick up your cell phone right now and contact more people than I can by sitting in my office using the telephone. Absolutely. We need to have that ability and use that ability to reach out and contact our community, not only to give information, but to solicit information to get it back. And then also the use of technology for the officers. Let's work smarter. Let's don't work harder. Let's use technology to our benefit. Right. And then community policing and crime reduction. Community policing has been a hot button that's been going on for years. And I think when you look back, the worst thing that ever happened to law enforcement was the radio in the car, because it isolated the police officer from the public. Yeah. And it was driven because of demands for service. They have to get from point A to point B in a hurry. But years back, when you look back, when there was officers on foot beat, walking around, they had an open dialogue with the public. They knew what was going on in their particular area of assignment. They had that online communication, and they could help solve problems. And making arrests is not solving a problem. Right. Arrest should be the last option that takes place as opposed to being the first option that happens. And then, obviously we need to worry about training and education for all our personnel. And then the safety for the officers, their well-being, the stresses that they go through. What do we do in order to address those stresses that they're facing? Well, so the platform is there. We just have to be willing to accept it and be willing to use it. That's a powerful outline of things. Yes. To look at. You talked about the fact that there was a time that our law enforcement used to patrol actual neighborhoods. They were assigned to particular communities, got to know those individuals within the community, and that's been one of the things that I've cried aloud about. That if policemen are assigned to particular communities, then it gives them the opportunity to know the people in the neighborhoods that they're released to serve or dispatched to serve. It's kind of hard to serve people that you don't know or have a connection with. And so I agree with you. I believe that's one of the things that was lost. But you brought up something else about making sure that our law enforcement remain healthy, because the job that they have is a job that's full of trauma. Yes. They experience a lot of different things. They're in crossfire. They're under high stress. And so how do we make sure that their mental health is what it needs to be? And that, we have a healthy law enforcement. And so, those were two of the things that stuck out, even though all of those things are important. Yes. Again, we're talking about, is it legitimate? And you said that you believe that it's legitimate, that we look into the overuse of force. Right. I had a member who taught a class, who was a part of law enforcement, and he said, it's so important that you comply
because we're taught in the academy to shoot to kill. And he was very, very intentional on letting us know that if you don't comply and you're trying to use your phone or you're trying to do this or that, we're taught that if we've got to pull out this gun and that if a shot has to be fired, that it's a death shot. Because in our mind, we have to think about, if I don't put you down, does it give you an opportunity to kill me? And, when him talked about that and I shared with him, that's very disturbing because every incident is not a shoot to kill moment, and that there should be some type of common sense, in policing. And so if our training trains our law enforcement that way from the offset, then of course a part of reform needs to be that we need to look at some of the training that we're instituting, because some things that call for common sense in the national media, we haven't really seen common sense be so common. In some incidents, it seems like the mentality of shoot to kill has been implemented.
And if I can touch on something real quick, the academy, they teach the shoot to eliminate the threat,
right?
In center body mass,
right? Okay. That's what he said. Right.
Yeah, center body mass. And I don't disagree with you. I think, and let me talk about Glynn County Police Department.
Right.
I can't speak for other agencies, but let me talk about Glynn County Police Department. Since 2018. The Board of Commissioners and the county manager has increased training dollars substantially.
Right.
Which has helped us to get more training for the officers, do exactly what you're saying, find alternative methods to using deadly force. And I can sit here today and proudly tell you that from 2018 until February of 2020, and I don't have the statistics beyond that, that no use of deadly force had taken place. Nobody had been killed by the Glynn County Police Department. Okay. I'm very proud of that. And I would love to see that trend go on. And also, let me say this. I'm a firm believer that the use of deadly force is absolutely the last option that's available, right, to either protect the officer or protect somebody else.
Right.
In my time as a police officer, once again, from 83 until now, I have never had to take another person's life. I'm very proud of that fact.
Right.
And I hope that I can finish my career and still have the same comment to you. But I do think if you say, well, the department had, one fatality, one's too many. We've got to find a way that either by, additional training, alternative methods to using deadly force, or by having, when you have a person that is armed and threatening to use force,
right,
showing an overwhelming amount of force presence so that person will think again before, taking that step.
Right.
Trying to do something to end the situation in a very peaceful manner, even if it means calling in somebody such as yourself to come in and talk with them, to try to negotiate with them and get them to look at the alternative, that's available to them.
Right. Well, hey, it sounds like we're absolutely in agreement, and I'm excited to hear that God has covered you and that you've never had to use force at a point that it is led to the loss of life.
Yes.
That's very commendable. In terms of all of the attention that is on law enforcement in this season, and of course we'll talk about it, but the Ahmaud Arbery shooting, Breonna Taylor, and then the George Floyd, it seems like that systematic flow of events caused protests to happen across the nation at a very, very heightened level, at a level that we haven't seen in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that the protests for civil rights probably were closely resembled that we're seeing right now. But as someone being in law enforcement and who's committed yourself in law enforcement, how does it make you feel? And I'm not talking about from a procedural standpoint. I'm just talking about as a human, hearing all of the cry about the defunding of law enforcement and all of the focus that is going in. How does it make you feel as someone that has been committed to law enforcement?
Well, I understand, our country is founded on the fact that as citizens, we have a right to address issues that we do not feel that are just.
Right.
We have a right to gather. We have a right to state our opinions. We have a right to argue the point.
Right.
To advocate for change. I understand that. As a person, I hate that it's got to this point. I think everybody would say that we hate that it's gotten to this point because, when you look at all the incidents that you mentioned and so many more,
right.
Unfortunately, there are multiple victims in this, not just the families, the individuals who have been hurt, but also the communities. And when you run down the line, it also comes to the country. The country's been hurt because now, internationally we're being looked at, by everybody. And not only is it happening here, it's also happening across, over in Europe and other places. So obviously there's an issue that we have to address, and where do we go? And I'm talking as a person, not as a law enforcement officer.
Right. Where
do we go in order to correct these problems? First of all, I think having dialogue like we're doing right now is very important.
Right.
I think we need to sit down. We need to be willing to listen. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a right to be heard. And there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with each other. It's how you go about doing it.
Right.
I respect your opinion. I know you respect my opinion.
Right.
We can get along. I'm very proud of the way that the people here in Glynn County and in Brunswick,
absolutely,
how they handled themselves, how they addressed the issue, the issues that are facing not just our community, but nationally. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud to be a member of this community, the way that they've handled it. As you know, the reason I haven't come out before now to say anything is because I have certain limitations that's on me.
Right.
I'm sure we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I think that it's time. And, when you gave me an opportunity to come out, that's why I wanted to sit down with you. But I think that our community and nationally, there's got to be a healing process. I don't think that the destruction of property is the answer to it. I don't think that taking somebody else's life or injuring somebody is going to solve it.
Right.
That all that does is just agitate the situation and make it worse. I do think that by having conversation, dialogue, and having discussion is beneficial. As far as defunding the police, John Powell's opinion, not as a law enforcement officer.
Right.
I think historically, if you look back, law enforcement has been given so many tasks over the years. I'm not making excuses. I'm just stating a fact.
Right.
Such as, license for wreckers, license for cabs, checking parking meters, different things that are not really a law enforcement function, but they got tasked with doing that.
Right.
And you've always heard of the saying that, you can become a jack of all trades and a master of none. That, a lot of that, the load, and once again, not making excuses, but the load has gotten so tremendous on law enforcement as a whole that we've lost our focus. Our focus is to provide safety to everybody, not just, a certain group of people, but to everybody, and to make sure that everybody has the right to enjoy the freedoms that are guaranteed us, not just through the U.S. Constitution, but through God.
Right. Well, you said something when you were sharing with us about it's so important that the act of peaceful protest doesn't go left to rioting and looting and violence. And I've been saying that consistently because there is a threat that you lose the message that you were trying to communicate. And so that's something that I'm hoping that we see less of, that we see protesters continue to move forth in their protest, but they do it in a way that honors the message that they're trying to get across so that it's not lost. And in terms of defunding, honestly, I'm not one of the ones that advocate for defunding. I believe that our law enforcement needs to have monies in place so that they can operate, so that they can be trained, and also be paid. Because we're talking about men and women who are willing to put their life on the line for the life of other persons. But the caveat for me is that if the money's going to be in place, then we've got to make sure that we can hold the system to do what it has been purposed to do at the greatest level of integrity. And I think one of the biggest concerns is not that there's an unwillingness to push tax dollars in that direction. The question is, okay, we've been pushing our tax dollars in that direction, and what have we been really getting back in return? We see police brutality. We see the failure to properly administrate and just a whole list of things that have been cited. And so I think the issue is on the quality of what we're getting from law enforcement across the country versus should they really be funded?
Well, and I think you've opened up the door on a great topic. Number one, on defunding. Let me once again talk about Glynn County Police Department. Let me say this: the Board of Commissioners and the county manager, they have been very supportive of the police department in trying to get dollars such as the training money I mentioned earlier.
Right.
To the police department, and the result in that extra training money, we have seen once again no fatalities in 2 years. Right. Which I think is, talk about a return on investment. That's a tremendous return on investment. And I think that trend can continue. I do believe in accountability. And I think that having a county police agency, as far as accountability, you're accountable straight to the Board of Commissioners, the elected officials who all constituents elect.
Right.
You're accountable to the Board of Commissioners for every dollar that is spent. If I go $1 overtime, I've got to go to the county manager and explain why that money's being, where did it go? Right. Why is it being over budget? Which I think that accountability needs to be there. Keep in mind the trending that we're facing right now in the country. We have a lot of people that's returning that are vets. They're dealing with PTSD.
Right.
We have a increase in mental health issues that we're having to deal with. And if we don't come up with a solution, non-lethal solution to those, when we deal with situations where we're dealing with somebody who has those problems, then it could easily escalate into a use of force situation. And we don't want that.
I think we need to add to that list the coronavirus.
Absolutely.
There are people who are losing it over the circumstances that we find ourselves in, the restraints and the limitations that are being imposed upon them. And so there are a lot of different things that we're going to have to be prepared for in terms of our law enforcement being equipped to deal with those. Well,
and also let me bring this up if I can. I have been beat over the head because, there's been a comment where there's a lot of negative stuff at the police department. And I'm probably guilty of being transparent about the issues that's taking place at the police department because I think the public needs to know. Right. I don't hide things.
Right.
If one of the officers overstepped their bounds, I make sure that, that's taken care of, it's dealt with, but also that the public is aware of it because I want the public to know that I've dealt with that situation. I've had 2 major situations that I've dealt with since 2018. And I want to emphasize, and once again, not making excuses, I've only been the police chief since 2018. I haven't been there for 15 years.
Right.
I dealt with a situation involving Corey Sasser in 18, and I dealt with a situation involving James Casada in 2019. Very extensive situations.
Right.
But I was transparent with it, I was upfront with it, and I dealt with the situation the way it should have been dealt with.
Well, we appreciate transparency.
Well, and I appreciate that, but some people use it against us because they say, look at all these issues that's taking place. Well, issues take place at every organization that's operating. But we're a public entity. We're funded by tax dollars, so the public has a right to know. And I do not believe in shielding the public, from what the bad circumstances are, what takes place, what's negative at the agency. You need to know what's taking place, but you also need to know what is being done in order to correct it, like you said earlier.
Right. I believe that's a great segue into the Ahmaud Arbery incident. We know that, of course, national news wind up being on our front doorstep as a result of the Ahmaud Arbery shooting. I have been very, very vocal and public about my disapproval over how it was handled by our local law enforcement and by our Board of Commissioners. And even to the point of initially saying that Chief John Powell needs to be fired.
Yes, sir.
Because there was no arrest made. And so this opportunity gives us a moment to really just honestly talk about the events surrounding that. For me, when we looked at the police report and before the video ever came out, when we look at the police report, I had some great concerns about how could someone chase down someone and it end in the taking of their life under the guise of self-defense when the other person had no weapon. And in the Black community, we don't have a reference point of one of our comrades being able to take somebody's life and it not end in an arrest. So there was great question about how this young Black man could end up deceased by three white men. And I say three because I consider Ronnie a part of it. And, he has to be tried, but I consider him a part of it. And one of them being a ex-law enforcement person / investigator. And so on my end, and, my thoughts were the thoughts of a lot of other people within the minority community, that an arrest should have been made. And because the arrest was not made, it was our thoughts that someone has to be held accountable. And of course, with you being the chief, all roads led to the chief at the time, because they were saying that they called it in, and that the chief ultimately had to make that decision from a law enforcement standpoint, that the deputies, they called it in, it gets to you, and then you tell them what call that they are to make. And the trigger on making the arrest was not pulled. And so would love to hear your comments about what took place.
Be glad to, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let me clarify some of the misinformation that's been put out. Number one, the chief of police doesn't make the final decision on whether there's an arrest made or not. Each law enforcement officer has that ability by virtue of being sworn as a peace officer in the state of Georgia. They make the determination based off of probable cause that is developed through the investigation. So that's not a true statement.
Okay.
I was made aware of it. I was made aware of it by a communication, 911 communication text, which is a standard protocol that is done by the communication center on major events. They send out a text. It's called an administrative page.
Right.
And it comes out and it has a narrative of what's taking place. It's a very limited narrative, but it comes out. And I was made aware of that. And my time may be a little off, so pardon me. But it's probably around, 1:30 in the afternoon, something like that on Sunday.
Right.
Was made aware of that. I take that information and I immediately initiate a telephone call to the captain of investigations because I know they're going out there.
Right.
I talk to him. I get a couple of more details of the event, and I put that on the text, that I take that text and then I send it to the county manager for him to be aware of what's taking place, for him to review it. I follow that text up by saying I'm fixing to release this to the Board of Commissioners.
Right.
And I send that text to the Board of Commissioners for them to be aware of what's taking place. Then I have communication with the captain who's talking to the investigators on the scene. Now let me tell you that I have very limited exposure to this. You've got more than I have. I haven't even seen the reports.
Okay.
Because the only participation I had was that Sunday afternoon to Monday. That's the only participation that I was involved in on the case. The investigators on the scene made contact with the district attorney's office. Now, I know there's been some discussion about, did they talk to Jackie? Did they talk to some assistant district attorneys? And I don't know if they talked to Jackie Johnson or not. I wasn't there. I wasn't involved in the conversation, but I do know that they talked to two different assistant district attorneys.
Okay.
Which is not uncommon. And I know that there's been a narrative put out there, well, that's unusual. That doesn't happen. I've got some cases that I took the liberty of going through right here to tell you that on the Hines case, they worked, and these are just a few, not all.
Right.
But on the Hines case, they worked hand in hand with the district attorney. The Cabrera case, they worked hand in hand with the district attorney. The Zay case, they worked hand in hand with the district attorney. The Casada case, we worked hand in hand with the district attorney. A homicide case that took place in 2018, the individual, the victim in that case, last name was Proctor. They worked hand in hand with the district attorney.
Right.
That's just a sample of the cases where the DA has been attributed to saying that, this is unusual for them to reach out to us. Also, I want to cite the actual Georgia code, and I'll give you a copy of this, that the district attorney has said that, and this is attributed to Jackie, that she said she was doing a favor to the police department by having ADAs, assistant district attorneys, talk to the officers, and then also by reaching out to Waycross, Mr. Barnhill, and having him involved in the case, that she was doing a favor. She's not doing a favor. She's following what the law says. That's part of her job, as you see this on the paper right there.
Right.
That's her job to do that, to provide assistance. So I want to clear the air on that. That wasn't a favor. That's her job. Based on the information that the ADAs, the assistants, gave the officers that's on the scene. Now keep in mind, you got to look at the totality of everything.
Right.
The individuals were there, the suspects in the case. The weapons or the weapon was recovered. The individuals provided statements. They went out to the police department and provided statements to the police officers, the investigators that was working the scene. And they had collected all the evidence and collected witness statements and, totality. That's being given to the assistant district attorney. That's where the comment was, we don't see a flight risk because they knew that they were residents. We don't see a flight risk. There's not a reason to make an arrest. And I'm paraphrasing because once again, I wasn't there.
Right.
That the district attorney from Waycross, Mr. Barnhill, would be at the police department on Monday, which was the 24th of February, to go over, look over the case, to include the video, all the reports, all the information, all the documentation, and then make a decision as far as which way to process, from there. That's the part that I played in. I also want to stress the thing about being a police officer. The initial call that came out didn't indicate that the older Michael was a suspect. It said his son was a suspect. His son has never been involved in law enforcement. So, when you say the rumor, and I've heard the same thing, this is a police officer involved shooting. The older Michael wasn't thought to be involved. And even if he had been involved, he hadn't worked with the police department for, 20 years.
Right.
At the Glynn County Police Department. I don't know him. If I've ever met him, it was in passing. I don't know him, don't have a relationship with him. And I certainly can't speak for the other officers that was on the scene, but I know him. And based on the officer's age, I would suspect highly that they probably didn't have a relationship with him either. I don't think they work together is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Let me not let you get too far gone so that we can backpedal.
Sure.
And deal with some of the stuff that you were talking about. We know that in law, there's a such thing as aiding and abetting.
Correct.
And so even though he wasn't the trigger man, based upon the fact that he's on the truck with the armed weapon, mm-hmm. he's very much a part of everything that took place.
Agree, 100%.
So he aided and abetted, there are people that try to categorize Ronnie's, involvement as something uniquely different, but I see that as
I agree with you. But the narrative that has been given to the public, and I think probably intentionally, is that what you've heard this time and time again, because I have. He was a member of the Glynn County Police Department. Well, yes, 20 years ago, but lastly, he was an investigator with the district attorney's office,
right?
And also, he was a deputy sheriff with the Glynn County Glynn County Sheriff's Office. But you hadn't heard that come out.
Right.
And that's the more recent attachment to law enforcement would be those two categories as opposed to the Glynn County Police Department.
Right. I think, his history speaks to the established relationships that he has.
Absolutely.
And so the narrative was to paint a picture of someone who is connected to relationships of influence in these different areas.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that possibly these relationships of influence were a big factor in no arrests being made. Again, I go back to, and we can only talk about what we have exposure to.
Yes,
in the African American community. I've known incidents where people have been in the car with someone and had no idea, honestly, that person was about to do what they were about to do. And when they committed that crime because they were in the car, they were guilty by association, let alone committed a crime and found themselves not being arrested. And so it's still hard to wrap my mind around the idea that these men were able to take a human life. Now, the shooting didn't happen on their property.
That's correct.
if they accuse him of breaking into their home, shot him, and he's laying dead on their property, we have a whole nother incident. But they claim that he broke in. They chased him. I don't know what the distance was, but it was a great distance away from where the situation happened at. Take his life, and then our law enforcement, they wind up not making an arrest. Now, you brought out something that was that's interesting, and it's new information for me, that any officer that arrives on the scene is empowered to make an arrest. And so based upon that statement, there's some other names that need to be thrown into this discussion, and need to be investigated, because still the question on the table is, how could this incident happen and our law enforcement show up on the scene and not see it as something that calls for an arrest?
Well, and let me do this. And once again, I'm not trying to defend anybody, because I wasn't there.
Right.
Okay? I want to emphasize that. And I have very limited information. Once again, I haven't seen the file, any of the information that's in the file. The officers who were on the scene conducting the investigation, if they're working hand in hand with the prosecuting authority, which is the district attorney,
right?
You now know, because you see it in the code,
okay, that
their job under bullet number 7 is to guide and provide information and to give support to the investigative agency, which would be, in this matter, would be the Glynn County Police Department. If they're telling the officers on the scene, do not make an arrest, wait till the DA comes in Monday morning from Waycross, who's going to review the totality of everything that you have,
right,
and will give you information, give you guidance, tell you which direction to go. And I'm not justifying, I'm telling you what occurred.
Right.
The officers followed through with that. Then they did follow through on Monday morning. And we know by a document, once again, that was memorialized by Mr. Barnhill, the district attorney out of Waycross.
Absolutely.
His findings, and the statements that he made to the police officers. And we also know the fact that the Glynn County Police Department was pushing him to make a decision on something instead of, dragging us out, because what we have now is the family is being tormented because there hasn't been, any kind of action taken.
Right.
And I understand that, they're being tormented because this thing goes months and months and months and months before anything takes place. But I also want to emphasize the fact that you've got everybody. When I say that, I'm using figure of speech. You have everybody on the sideline saying, well, the GBI should have been called. Okay, let's take that path for a second. Let's assume for a minute, okay, the GBI should have been called. The district attorney on Sunday could have said, y'all hold the crime scene. I'm calling the GBI to come out and work the case. That didn't happen.
Right.
The district attorney on Monday morning, when he looked at everything, said, or could have said, I'm going to call the GBI. Y'all hold everything and I'll get an agent to come over and look at this. The interim police chief on Friday could have looked at the file and said, I think the GBI should have been called. That didn't happen. I know for a fact all the way up to the 14th of April that everybody had reviewed it, everybody had looked at it, including the video. Nobody had come up with a scenario, we need to call the GBI on this.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it went through several district attorneys, several law enforcement professionals. Nobody came up with a conclusion by calling the GBI till the governor of the state of Georgia got on the news and said, I'm making available the state resources for GBI. And I'm not justifying, I'm just saying, right. It seems kind of ironic now, at the end of the, at the fourth quarter, everybody wants to point the finger and everybody's trying to look for excuses and trying to play the blame game.
Well, I think everybody was looking for excuses in the first quarter.
Well, that may have been true, but I'm a realist. I deal with the information when it's presented to me.
Right.
I know for a fact that we had a tragedy take place. The officers investigated. They were working with the district attorney, even though Jackie Johnson says that that's not her job. She was doing us a favor. We now know that that's not correct because you see the state law. She's providing information. She's telling the officers that, the arrest, stand down basically on the arrest, or somebody from her is telling the officers stand down on the arrest, and that the district attorney from Waycross will follow up on Monday. And we know what the district attorney from Waycross, the guidance that he provided the police department on Monday, via the letter that he crafted and gave to the police officer.
Right. And what you're referring to is that it says to advise law enforcement officers concerning the sufficiency of evidence. And I think I can stop there.
Yes,
so when I hear this whole thing of to advise law enforcement concerning the sufficiency of evidence.
Yes, sir.
There has been a partnership of courtesy that has tried to be developed between local law enforcement and our DA. Because if you all arrest someone, then now it gets turned over to the DA and they
Correct.
have to move forth with prosecution.
Yeah, the district attorney or the solicitor.
Right. So because of that unique process, you all have been trying to work as a partnership.
Yes, sir.
Understanding, that it's a systematic process, to the process of justice.
Right.
But in your lane as law enforcement officers, you all are authorized to make an arrest.
Absolutely.
As a professional courtesy, you all have been calling the DA to be advised about proper charges. What's the proper charge for this, because it's going to be passed forward.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a courtesy. I think it's more of making sure that we're doing everything that we should do on our end to ensure if you take somebody's freedom away from them, number one, you want to make sure that person potentially is guilty.
Right.
And I know everybody's entitled to have a trial, but you want to make sure before you separate that person from their family and loved ones that the charges that you're accusing them of is pretty well founded in probable cause.
Right.
You work with the district attorney to make sure that they're going to have everything they need in order to have a successful prosecution. You just don't want to throw somebody in jail, ruin, give them a black mark against their livelihood, their family, the whole 9 yards, simply because you feel like you're mad and you want to throw somebody in jail. You want to make sure that when you arrest somebody, like I said earlier, arrest is the last option.
Right.
When you go to make an arrest, that you have everything you need in order to be successful for prosecution. That's why on major cases, the police department contacts the district attorney's office and gets information from the DA, once again, which is part of their responsibility to ensure, it's not a courtesy, but to ensure that we have collected evidence that we need. We've got witness statements that we need, that we have everything that they're going to need when they get to a trial stage in order to establish that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Level that's needed for a conviction.
Well, I can hear community voices all in my ear right now, without having them on the phone. Or law enforcement works with the DA in order to make sure that they have proper cause for the arrest. Want to dot every I, cross every T.
Correct.
But in so many cases that are lesser offenses, we find people being arrested and put in jail. And then when it came to this situation, something that was grossly different, there was the failure to pull the trigger on making an arrest in the taking of somebody's life. Again, we go back to the fact that this is an unarmed man, and they were able to take his life well away from the incident that they were citing, that where they claimed he broke into a house and took something. It ends in his life, and it's away from the scene where they say the incident happens, and there's no probable cause for arrest in that situation.
I can only tell you what I know. Like, once again, I haven't seen the file. I haven't seen the reports. I don't know the evidence that was collected.
Okay, let's do this. You and I are not the judge and jury right now.
That's right.
We're just two individuals speaking.
Right.
One individual, I have no police background. And so I'm leaning on your expertise right now. Mm-hmm. Is that normal for someone to be able to take someone's life in a situation like that with those type of things happening and there's no arrest made?
Have I seen cases where there's been a loss of life?
Is it logical? Because I know it's happened before in the past.
Yeah, I don't know all this. I wasn't on the scene. Let me tell you the thing that I look at. You have the suspects who didn't flee. You have the suspects who turned the weapon over. You have the suspects who agree to go down and give statements to the police officers. So and I'm not justifying it.
Right.
Okay, I'm just telling you, I'm trying to weigh it out. So you've got all this that the suspects are doing, cooperating with the police. Usually when you have a loss of life, the person who took that life flees the scene and tries to hide or tries to destroy evidence or tries to flee the area or whatever the case may be. This circumstance did not happen. For whatever reason, I know it didn't happen.
Right.
Okay. So you got to factor that in as well. So when you ask me, when I look at the question about being a flight risk, okay, the parties are known. I mean, we know that because it's been here all their life. They got to have residence here.
Right.
They didn't flee, and once again, all the cooperation that was given. I have seen where cases were investigated and later an arrest was made. As a matter of fact, the one I just mentioned to you, that's a case, the same thing. A homicide took place. From person looking outside, was there enough information to make an arrest? Probably, to make the arrest. Did they wait until they gathered more information to make sure that they could do a successful prosecution? Yes. They didn't make the arrest right away. They waited until to make the arrest.
Okay. And I think that's the point of tension for community.
And I understand it.
Because again, we're talking about Glynn County.
Yes, sir.
And we've had some increases in crime. Of course, we've had growth, and with growth, some of that takes place. But when you start talking about the taking of life,
one event is too much.
Right.
And now let me say this. I will tell you that I don't think you're asking John Powell.
Right.
Okay. I don't think that it should have drug out like it did, by no means. I think there should have been an answer relative, within 3 or 4 days, as far as, if these people were going to be arrested, then they should have went ahead and made the arrest. That's my opinion.
Right.
I don't have benefit to all the circumstances. I don't have benefit to all the evidence or the reports. I didn't have any of that.
Right. Now, we know that there's a pending case that's soon to be brought to conclusion, that took you out of the loop.
Yes, sir.
So this happens on Sunday.
Correct.
And, when do you get taken out of the loop?
Monday, I was taken out of the loop.
Roughly what time Monday would that have been? Evening.
Let's say Monday afternoon to be on the safe side, because I don't have the exact time or anything.
Okay. Now, and
then once I'm out, once again, I don't have access to any information.
Right. So once you get in the office Monday, the murder of a young man, that's not the priority of Monday?
It is a priority. They're meeting with the district attorney, Mr. Barnhill, on that Monday.
Okay.
And they're meeting, and that meeting probably took, please don't hold me to a time frame,
right?
But probably, 2.5, 3 hours maybe, or maybe a little longer than that. They met with him, and also he had an assistant with him, but I don't know who she was. It's a female, but I don't know her name.
Okay.
Mr. Barnhill did.
Well, I mean, you're really helping us understand the process, because maybe it's that we need to lobby for changes of processes. Maybe more people need to be held accountable. My stance has been very, very firm, that there has to be transparency.
Absolutely.
100%. And those that have oversight of our local law enforcement have to be willing to hold somebody accountable. This really was a black eye, in my opinion, on our community. We've done a great job at managing the protest and the call for justice.
Yes, sir.
In a spirit of excellence. But in terms of being able to trust how our system overall handled this case, that's still an area with a great big question mark on it. What went wrong? What do we need to do to fix it? If there was a person accountable for the wrong that took place, who is that person? We've never heard that from our board of commissioners in terms of where the breakdown was. And honestly, I've been non-apologetic in my views regarding this upcoming vote.
Yes.
I think that our current governmental system is a good one. I think the structure of being able to go to our board of commissioners, voice concerns, and then they are able to put a hand on law enforcement immediately. I think that's ideally is a good system. But if we have a group of individuals that will not oversee properly, then that leaves our law enforcement with a license to do whatever they want to do. And that doesn't best serve the community.
And let me touch on that if I can.
Okay.
I think, historically, the police department had the same management structure for 15 years.
Right.
That whole structure has been changed starting in 2000. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I'm saying starting in 2018, the management structure, not just the police chief,
right,
the captains changed, and there was new captains appointed. And changes have been instituted at the police department that are in line with the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, which is recognized by, any place in the country and international.
Right.
As far as setting the bar and doing progressive professional policing policies, procedures, on the cutting edge. Those implementations were taking place or are taking place at the police department. And I think that as far as accountability, I'm all for accountability.
Right.
As a matter of fact, sir, I'll be honest with you. When I had the Corey Sasser incident, I wanted information put out into the public about the true, circumstances of Corey Sasser, and I was blocked from doing that. Not by the Board of Commissioners.
Right.
But by the District Attorney's Office. And I think it's ineffective and goes back to having open dialogue and communication with the public.
Okay.
We need to know what's going on.
That I told you before we even started that this time would fly by on us.
Yes, sir.
And we're down to 2 minutes. So, I'm going to have all kind of questions we're supposed to talk about that we never got to. I guess a continuation of what we already been talking about. Where does the responsibility lie for no arrest?
I think, honestly, there may be a combination of both law enforcement and the district attorney and prosecuting authority.
Okay. I
think that like you said, there may be need to be a review of the processes that are in place to ensure this doesn't happen again. I'm a firm believer that, it's a tragedy. It's a terrible tragedy. And we have to learn so that we prevent anything like this from happening in the future. And we take the lessons that are learned, review. We identify where there was a failure. We identify those failures and we make sure those failures don't happen again. If it's a fact that the advisement from the district attorney from the ADAs was saying, we don't think they're a flight risk, don't take them into custody, then we correct that. We make sure that didn't happen again. Maybe we say, okay, we take him into custody, and we do go back to an old fashioned system called a coroner's inquest. We bring it before the public and lay out the facts and circumstances and see if we do any kind of official indictment on it, a charge.
Right.
There's mechanisms in place, I think, that can be used to prevent, situations like this from occurring in the future. Once again, the delay, I can't explain the delay. I wasn't there.
Right.
And I know that sounds like an excuse, but I'm telling you the truth.
No, it happened Sunday.
That's right.
I think the emphasis for me is that on Sunday an arrest should have been made.
Yeah.
But, the decision is made that, we need to gather more information, more evidence. So there are no flight risks. So we'll wait till Monday. Monday happens and then you're pulled out the scene. During the time that you're there, Barnhill is already in place having the discussion. And it's clear that he wrote out their defense for them. So there are different things at play. I think for our listeners and for me, you've been honest enough to say that there's dual responsibility here. Maybe there's some responsibility on law enforcement and on the DA's part. And now as a community, we have to figure out how we fix it.
Yes, sir.
I know that doesn't happen with us being silent about it. Whenever we're silent about things that have become obvious, it's an insult to the people that we're called to serve. And so I want to thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Of course, there's
let me say one more thing. Let me say one more thing. And I think emphasis need to be put on the investigative actions that were taken by the police department. GBI themselves have complimented the investigative actions of the police department and said that they use that to further.
They're politicians too.
Well, I can't. All I can say is is a comment to the
I try to master the art of looking at the positive,
yes,
even though there's some obvious negative, and I'll lead with the positive. A lot of times, even though there's clear negative, I think they gathered the information, and that's the part that they said they did a wonderful job gathering the information.
Yes, sir.
From my end, did you act on the information that you gathered. And that's the focal issue, because there was no arrest. We had to depend upon outside entities to come in and do what we should have had the ability to do in our own house. And as citizens that are called to trust our law enforcement, we're raising that question. Okay, where did the breakdown happen? We want to trust you. We want to, we want to know that you've got it and we don't have to worry about it. But in this incident, something happened that was not right, and nobody's really speaking to it. And I want to thank you for being willing to just come talk with me and talk to our listeners on today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. And perhaps we can do more of this until we get to the end of all that is taking place. I pray that today's show has been informative, if nothing else. I know there's been a lot of different views about this particular show on today, but I pray that you walk away from it feeling that it was done in a way to advance our community. We love you, and please tune in next week for Candid Conversation with yours truly, John Davis Perry II.